Okay, I have 1:03 by my clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody to this month's episode of Apple Exchange. Our topic today is weather apps, which if you're anywhere near the Chicago area, you are probably thinking a little bit about the weather today because it is quite chilly. We had wind chills in the negative temperatures this morning during our morning commute. So obviously, weather is something that's pretty timely for us to talk about at this point. Now, weather apps is actually a topic that was talked about on the App Exchange, or on the Apple Exchange rather, several years ago. But it's a topic we're revisiting, not only because it's that time of year, but because there are constantly changes going on, and we also have a revolving group of people who are interested in Apple Exchange. So some have joined us recently and therefore would not have been here when we went over the apps that were available several years ago. I wasn't here, so I have a sneaking suspicion that there are others of you who were not there. My plan today is for us to go over the accessibility, functionality, and usability of 6 different weather apps. Now, quite frankly, if you go out to the Apple App Store, you will find that there are a lot of weather apps, and I only picked 6 for us to talk about today. Part of the reason for that is that 5 of these 6 are apps that have been reviewed by AppleViz. And AppleViz, that's AppleVis. AppleViz has been around for 17 plus years now, and they do an absolutely wonderful job of reviewing various apps and all things Apple related, specifically for those of us in the blind and low vision community. So I thought it would be a really good source to try to get input from the folks at AppleViz on any of the weather apps that they have reviewed. Now, in addition to the ones that are related to what AppleViz has reviewed, I have also done a little bit of review myself. So my comments today are not only going to include what has come from AppleViz, but also what's coming from me and my perspectives in reviewing these. And in addition to that, I've also gotten some input from a couple of other personnel here in the Second Sense office who are blind and low vision individuals who utilize these apps as well. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we'll do this kind of like a Casey Kasem's countdown, if you will. We're going to start with, of the 6, the one that I find the least appealing, and we'll talk about it, and then we'll move up from there to where by the time we're done, we'll build up to what I believe is the best of the weather apps that I've been able to review. So we're going to start with WeatherBug, and that's the word weather with the word bug right behind it, B-U-G. Now this app was reviewed in AppleViz back in September of 2010. And back then, they had a number of interesting comments about the app itself that included that there are accessibility problems, that some of the buttons are unlabeled, along with some that are poorly labeled, and that the interface was not easy to use, and that some areas just didn't seem to work. Now, they did point out that VoiceOver did read most of the page elements, and they felt that a number of the buttons were clearly labeled, but there were some that weren't at all labeled. Personally, I found a number of challenges with this one. Among them is the fact that there are major components of the display that, and just for disclosure here, folks, I still have central vision, and therefore I can see the screen in the apps as well as my ability to use VoiceOver with it. So I can tell you that there are certain things that I can tell and see on the app that VoiceOver is certainly not doing properly, okay? And as a part of that, I'll use the example that while you can use the app and when it defaults to whatever city you're in or that you have set up as a part of the cities and locations that you want to follow. As you use the swipe gesture to move down the screen, you end up getting to a spot where what is displayed is the temperature and the feels like temperature, the high and the low, and there's an icon that tells you what the general atmosphere looks like, and right now it says mostly sunny. However, but what ends up being said by the app is screenshot. It doesn't tell you anything about what's in the screenshot. It doesn't even give you any alt text. It just says screenshot. And then you end up saying, well, I'll try again and swipe right. And the next item is actually a little miniature map of the location where you are, trying to give you an overview of what the map would look like. And instead of just screenshot, it says picture. And then the next one talks about the wind and the direction for the wind. And I know this because I can see it with my eyeballs, but the description that you get with VoiceOver is diagram. These one-word descriptions of screenshot and picture and diagram are virtually worthless to those of us who would need to use VoiceOver to tell us what it means. And it doesn't really matter how far down the page you go. I thought maybe it was just the top, one or two items, but no, it's virtually every single item on the page. So as far as I am concerned, from an accessibility perspective, the app is not a very good app for those of us who need to have the benefit of VoiceOver to describe the information that's there. So I give it a vote. It doesn't work. Moving right along, from WeatherBug, we move to the Weather Channel. Now, the Weather Channel app has been around forever. And when we need to, watching it on television for the Weather Channel, that's a pretty good place to get information about weather. They go in really deep on things like major storms, hurricanes, tornado outbreaks, all those sorts of things. And when you are dealing with their app, it is chock full of information. And for those who have eyes and can look at the app, they can see all sorts of information that's there. Let me tell you what the folks at Apple Viz had to say for it. Their comment was, quote, "It's pretty ugly. Although you can make out things on it, and for the most part, it's something that I would not want to spend the time figuring out. The VoiceOver can read most of the page elements, and some of the buttons, actually they said most of the buttons, are clearly labeled. But then they point out that there are definite accessibility issues, and it could still be used if you're willing to tolerate those issues and learn how to work around them." That didn't sound very promising to me. So I started exploring it myself. My number one issue is that, and by the way, I don't spend money on apps, especially when there are free apps available. Well, the Weather Channel free version has ads on top of ads on top of more ads. And even if you are using your eyesight and you're trying to look at the screen, there will be ad pop-ups in addition to ads that are in the sequence of information that's provided. Now, interestingly enough, on the app, there is a row of buttons at the bottom that the only way to get there is by swiping right approximately 3 or 4 dozen times, or to possibly change over using the rotor to vertical navigation and just keep swiping down until you get there. Or you could randomly explore the page and use your finger to tap on the buttons. And those buttons on the bottom are like the channels that appear in a number of other apps. There's one for home, for hourly, for daily, a radar button, and then this time of year, there's a button for winter. Now, to get to those is very difficult. But once you get to them, you have the ability to move between if you will, the kind of forecast information that's available either on an hourly or a daily basis. What I also find very odd is the way that the buttons are labeled when you do get to the data. For example, if you move through to the hourly forecast and you have to swipe right multiple times and try to get past all of the ads, and then it starts reading to the times, if it happens to be a morning time, let's say you're checking the weather in the morning, instead of 8 a.m., it says 8 a.m. None of them. So 9 a, I'm sorry, 9 a, not the M sound, the ah sound of AM. And it takes a while to get used to what that's trying to tell you if you are completely dependent upon the information that's there. It would take quite a bit of time to get used to what's being read aloud to you. The same is true with respect to the daily. It goes through the dates, and instead of reading the dates clearly, it will try to read the numbers, but it's not very clear. So that one also gets a raspberry, but just not quite as long a raspberry as our first candidate, Weatherbug. Now, let's see. Moving right along. The next one that's in our group of apps that we wanted to talk about is called AccuWeather. That's AccuWeather. Now, this is another one that was reviewed by AppleViz back in 2010, and they have a mixed review. Their comments are that for the most part, it is accessible. However, there are unlabeled buttons throughout the app itself, and that some areas are difficult to navigate. The VoiceOver does read most of the page elements, and that the buttons that are labeled fairly clearly. And from an overall usability assessment, they said that there are some minor accessibility issues with the app, but that they're easy to deal with. I don't know, but maybe in the last 14 years it's gotten worse, because when I try to work with it, I find it very difficult to navigate through all the ads. And once again, similar to the Weather Channel, those ads are pop-up ads. If you know about the channels that are at the bottom, similar to the channels that are on the Weather app, then you can differentiate between today's view, hourly view, the daily view, and things of that nature. But just as soon as you pull up the app, literally within 5 seconds, an ad will pop up and take over the screen. And you don't have the ability to clear out that ad without clearing out of the app itself. And I thought this was just a one-time thing, but no, it's happened every single time that I have tried to go into AccuWeather. I do know that the app itself provides really good information. It is known for its accuracy at a very local level. You can put in not just the city, but the zip code. And then if you give it the ability to give you the weather based upon your location, as in when you're using the app or always, then it will give you weather forecasts that are very hyper local. And the one here in Chicago is actually fed most of its information by one of the local television channels. But once again, the problem is that the free version of these apps, or this app, similar to the Weather Channel, has so many ads, and you have to be able to circumnavigate those ads. And they make no apologies about having ads literally pop up and take over the entire screen. And when I say that, there isn't any way to even X out of those ads when they take over the entire screen.
Hey, Eric,
so,
can I jump in?
Yes.
Eric, can you hear me? I just want to add one quick item on this. On the AccuWeather, and you may be touching on this in a little bit, but I'm pretty certain that the NFC Newsline app that we've been given, thanks to Kathy setting up a meeting with Dave Meyer from the Illinois NFB. I believe there's a direct feed from AccuWeather, which I find is probably the most accurate weather predictor, directly into the NFB Newsline without all the ad clutter. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
I am really glad that you threw that out there, Jeff. And I do have the right person, right? Is Jeff you saying that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes. So one of the things that is really nice about the NFB Newsline is that it gets rid of all the ads and all of that clutter, and it distills the information down to some very finite, specific information. And I mean, it's in their name, AccuWeather. So the accuracy and the specificity, if you will, of your location, I think that's really cool. And I'm glad that you mentioned that this is available through NFB, because I don't know if it comes across this way, but I don't like panning these apps. People put a lot of time and energy into designing the apps. I think they just need to put a little more universal design into them, and they need to be more conscientious about the accessibility of the apps.
100%.
But the information itself that's there, if I'm using eyeballs and not using VoiceOver, I find that AccuWeather is actually a really good source of accurate weather information. Okay. That's the first three. The next one is an interesting app that even with an eyeball basis, I always found an oddity, and I found it to be one that it has a bizarre twist to it. This is called carrot weather. Carrot as in the root vegetable carrot, bright orange things that are supposed to improve your vision if you're Bugs Bunny. It was reviewed back in August of 2015, so much more recently, by the folks at AppleViz. And their comment is that for the most part, this app works very well with VoiceOver, and that the developer has a very good track record with VoiceOver support. VoiceOver will read most of the page elements. There are 4 sections that they found were inaccessible to VoiceOver, and those 4 sections included precipitation, wind, temperature, and UV, as in ultraviolet strength. And for those, it said that VoiceOver would read the heading, but not the data. Those are pretty important segments on a weather app. If you think about it. The amount of precipitation, the wind, the temperature, those 3 in particular are very definitely pieces of information that people want to hear. So at the time, they had concerns about that. All the buttons are labeled clearly, according to AppleViz, and they said that while there are some accessibility issues with the app, it can still be used if you're willing to tolerate those minor issues. Now, the part of the point of the Carrot Weather app is that it is an app with a personality. There are, I believe, 5 different personality components that you can choose and select that range from very businesslike to very snarky. I believe they even have one channel that is considered not safe for work because of the verbiage that it uses. And it can be very, like I said, snarky. It'll give you smart comments. It'll give you, if you will, irony, to be nice. But it's much more like the kind of things that you might see out of a Saturday Night Live skit set than anything else. But you can also set Carrot Weather to give you the straight news and nothing but the news. It also has a little sidebar story that kind of works like the old Tamagotchi names, where you are building a world or feeding a little pet animal, etc., in the background. Now, some people may find those things fun and enjoyable. They may find that the announcements of the weather in terms of those sorts of usage of words and things of that nature may be very fun. Others may find that that's really not their cup of tea. Personally, when I work through the app from a navigation and from a usability standpoint, I find that the app is very easy to navigate through the free version. Now, this one is also one that has a subscription version, and it's not a cheap one either. But I do know that you have the ability to scroll down from the hourly to the daily forecast information, and that vertical navigation, again, that's the option using the rotor to get to vertical navigation, will actually take you so far. But then, in order to get to the data elements beyond the temperature, which includes the feels like, precipitation chance, precipitation amount, wind, etc., that kind of requires some creative navigation, unless you can see the navigation bar in the middle of the screen, because there is a bar that shows up in the middle of the screen that is actually a slider selection bar, so that the first default component of that bar on the left might be the temperature, but then when you're trying to go over to not the temperature but the feels like temperature, which is kind of like what's the wind chill factor, or what's the humiture is what I've also heard it called, with the humidity index, you have to know where that middle slider bar is. And you have to intuitively find it by moving your finger around and exploring the screen until you find it. And then you can select those other selections. And once you do, then there is a component there for every hour or every day for each of those different types of data elements. But it is good information. It is generally accessible, but it's one of those that you have to play with for a while in order to better understand the interface and how to work with it with VoiceOver. By the way, those different attitudinal views, you can set those under the account, if you will, settings, so that when you're on the app, it is always on your preferred setting. But it is something that you have to go in up front and set your account on, if you will, using the app, so that it will always default to that presentation style. Because especially if you have it on VoiceOver and it's speaking aloud and you're not using headphones or hearing aids or other hearing instruments, whatever you have it set on, everyone's going to hear around you. Okay, moving on to number 2 on our list. Number 2 on our list is one that is called Weather Gods, and it was last reviewed in 2016 by AppleViz, and they gave it a very favorable review and very favorable rating. And just for clarity, so that everyone understands, yes, it is Weather Gods, G-O-D-S, as in Zeus or the fire god or the ice god, etc. And it has a pantheon of gods, is the way that the information is presented on the screen. Weather Gods is, according to AppleViz and their review, everything is very accessible, and that the app developers did a very nice job creating a very nice app and interface. That VoiceOver reads all of the page elements, that all of the buttons are clearly labeled, and that it is fully accessible with VoiceOver and easy to navigate. I have to concur. I agree. By the same token, that interface of the pantheon of the gods may take some getting used to. The fire god is relevant to the heat index. The ice god is how cold is it from a nighttime cold perspective. There is also the god of wind, and then there is one related to storms and things of that nature. Now, all of that is presented as, if you will, little icons of caricatures. If you're using your eyeballs, there are caricatures of faces over the top of little round balls that are decorated, such as a ball of fire or a ball of ice or a ball of clouds, etc. Visually, it didn't appeal very much to me at all. But when I start using VoiceOver and I move among and between each of the respective different components that are there, it actually makes sense. And the information is presented in a very straightforward and easy to understand way. The other thing that I would say is that in the middle of that particular pantheon, there is a dial that allows you to get into further detail, both past and future, relevant to the time of the day. And it allows you to move around and spin around to different points in time. My concern with that is that I didn't find it easy to navigate through. And that might have just been me because I haven't played with it a lot to better explore it. And I believe that, Jeff, when you and I were first chatting earlier, you mentioned Weather Gods as an app that you do have on your phone. Correct?
Yep.
Are you still there?
I was on mute, Eric. Yeah, I'm here. I was on mute. No, that is correct. That is correct.
Oh, okay.
The only question I had on it was I wasn't too sure, but I actually found, which I know is outside of the scope of what you're doing, is it didn't seem that the predictions and even some of the reporting of actual conditions, like it would be raining outside in Naperville, and it would just show up as cloudy, like current conditions. So the accuracy of the data is what I question. I think the usability is phenomenal on the app. I love it.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that we concur on the usability. I quite honestly, it's not an app that I use very much at all. The only thing that I've ever used it for, I downloaded it because of the favorable review with Apple Viz. I'll be honest about it. And I had hopes of it being kind of my go-to weather app, but it wasn't. And part of that, I think, is because I do have the ability to see that pantheon, and it just seemed too klutzy to me, to be perfectly honest about it.
Right. But as a blind user of the VoiceOver, I don't see anything. It works very, very well.
And I'm glad that you said that, because I can tell just by when I turn VoiceOver on and I try to work my way through it, the information that it provides is clear and succinct, and a simple swipe right and left to get you through the different buttons of information. And those are all pertinent pieces of information to know about the current weather. So it has both its pros and its cons, and as blind users who are dependent upon VoiceOver, it provides really good interface. And I'm also glad that you pointed out the, if you will, the accuracy of the data and or the lack of accuracy of the data. Weather is always one of those things. People used to jokingly say that the weather forecaster on the news forecast was the only person who was paid to be wrong. And they're paid regardless of whether they're right or wrong, because weather is literally it's more and more of a science, but there's a lot of art to it, and there are so many moving parts. It's not something that anyone has ever been able to make an absolutely perfect fit for. So it can be difficult to do it right and to do it well. So that brings us to the top pick of our 6. And I don't know if you've noticed or not, but all of the ones that I've been reviewing so far, they are available for review through Apple Viz. 2, none of those are, if you will, the native weather app that comes with your Apple iOS. And all of them are apps that you would need to download to your phone. They're all available free, and a number of them do have, if you will, premium versions that provide additional information. Some, for example, may add in lightning strikes and things of that nature. By the same token, the native Apple weather app was not reviewed by Apple Viz. So everything that you're about to hear is coming from either me or from colleagues that I have talked to here at Second Sense. Personally, I find that the Apple Weather app is very accessible. The interface is clear. All of the buttons are accessible, and VoiceOver navigation in and around and through the app is very straightforward. In short, it feels that you can tell that the Apple developers had VoiceOver and the VoiceOver accessibility functionality in mind when they designed and built the app. Everything is clearly labeled. It's easy to use and to navigate around the app using VoiceOver. And while it's not necessary to use vertical navigation in the rotor, it does make movement through the selections on the app somewhat quicker. For example, if you use the left and right swipe gestures, you can get through and to the hourly forecast. And if you continue to swipe right, I believe you can get through all 24 hours of the next 24 hours of the forecast. It might even be longer than 24, but you are going hour by hour by hour by hour. However, if you use the rotor and you apply vertical navigation as an option, you can quickly skip down to the next segment, which will give you the daily versions. And then once again, swipe right in order to move through day by day. So I found accessibility to be very hard to beat from the standpoint of what's available and how you're getting through the data. I've also found the data to be quite accurate from the standpoint of the point that Jeff was making earlier about it's clearly raining outside, but it only says cloudy on the app. I have found that the Apple Weather app is actually quite accurate. There is a predecessor weather app that used to exist that people used to like a lot, and it was very accessible. It's called Dark Sky. And Apple actually bought Dark Sky and incorporated a lot of the functionality and the programming of Dark Sky into the Apple Weather app. There were reviews years ago, not on Apple Viz, but in other places, that the Apple Weather app left a lot to be desired. But a lot of that changed when Dark Sky was purchased and absorbed into the overall Apple development ecosystem. One of the other things that I will touch on specifically about this app, because it was very much mentioned by one of my colleagues here, all of these apps allow you to save favorites, not just to know the weather where you are, which takes and requires, if you will, location accessibility, but you can also pre-save locations. So if you have family that lives in St. Louis, or you have family that lives in California, or a family that lives abroad, let's say in Paris or Rome or Timbuktu even, I mean, wherever there are major weather stations, you can select among hundreds of different weather stations and be able to check the weather in those respective locales. And as a part of that, you have the ability to change from one location to another. One of my colleagues commented that they have something in the neighborhood of 8 or 10 different locations that they try to keep track of the weather, because they have various family and friends in those locations, and they try to keep up with what's going on in their neighborhoods. And that's an easy thing to do in the Apple Weather app. Quite frankly, it's not something I tested for in the other apps. I do know that those other apps allow you to put in the different locations, but I did not personally check the accessibility with respect to changing locations. But that one colleague locally confirmed that it's a very easy thing for them to do and to use. So you not only get all the accessibility for where you are or the location that you want to go to, but also to other locations that you might keep an interest in. One thing that I also know, because this is true with respect to my day-to-day usage, is that I have a preset address in the Apple system on my phone, in the iOS, for my work address, and a preset address for my home address. And the phone picks up on my location to where it knows where I'm at. And although I'm only 10 miles away, the weather can be different. Well, Apple will automatically allow you to keep track of what's the weather at home versus the weather at work, in addition to your ability to set preset favorites, if you will, in other parts of the country. Given the issues that I've described and that I experienced in all of the other different weather apps, I quite honestly can't see a good reason why not to use the native Apple weather app. I find that it's intuitive usage with VoiceOver, that it is very easy to navigate and to negotiate around and through. The information is clear and straightforward, and all the buttons are clearly labeled. And I don't need vertical navigation, but vertical navigation does provide a little bit of a speed boost if you want to move between sections rather than go through, for example, all the hours in the hourly forecast. So that's my perspective and review of 6 different weather apps, doing kind of a Casey Kasem type of review and a countdown from number 6 with WeatherBug to number 5, the Weather Channel, to number 4, AccuWeather. And as was pointed out, AccuWeather is a very valid source of very accurate data, and you can get to it using the NFB Newsline. Carrot Weather, a personality all on its own. Weather Gods, which is a pantheon of various weather-related phenomenon, and it's very easy to navigate through. And then Apple Weather, which is the native Apple app. Now, I'd like to stop for a few minutes and open it up for others to either ask questions or to provide commentary from your own experience about weather apps. Weather is one of those things that all of us need to know about so that we can dress appropriately when we get up in the morning and decide that we need to go out, whether it's to go to the grocery, to go to work, or whatever the case might be. Because if you're standing out there waiting for a bus or you're waiting for the train, it can get very uncomfortable if you're not appropriately dressed for the weather of the day. So I'm going to open it up and ask if anyone has any comments or questions that they would like to voice for everyone else on the line.
So, quick question, Eric, on the Apple Weather app. I didn't even know about vertical navigation until you just brought it up. So I'm looking forward to trying that. So what I find annoying with the Apple Weather app that might actually address the vertical navigation is, let's say it's 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm heading off to work and it's raining outside, but I want to know what the weather's going to be like at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So normally I would, if it's not raining, I would just have to swipe over 6 times to the right to get to 1 o'clock p.m. and boom, there I would be. But when it's raining, I get a minute by minute by minute by minute for 60 minutes of heavy rain, moderate precipitation, light precipitation. So I literally have to swipe right 60 times to get to the 8 o'clock hour. And then I could go from there to 9 to 10 to 11 to 12 to 1 o'clock. Does some vertical navigation compensate for that?
I honestly don't know, but I think it might. And the reason I say that is because one of the things that happens with the Apple Weather app is that when there is precipitation, they insert another row of information on the app that is related to precipitation before you get to the temperature on an hour by hour basis. So in other words, it's a precipitation forecast row of data that's broken down on a usually a bi-hourly basis. And what I think is happening there, Jeff, is that the app itself is somewhat dynamic in that when there's precipitation, that row of information appears. And when there isn't, if it's a bright sunny day, then that row of data does not appear. You might find the same thing with respect to snow and the snow flurry forecast or the snowstorm forecast.
Yeah.
So I think that if you try vertical navigation, it will allow you to move past that precipitation forecast to get to conditions or temperature forecast. That would also probably be by hour. And then if you vertical navigation again, one more time downward, it will move you past those hourly navigations to get to the daily.
Yeah.
I can't test it at the moment because we do have a pretty day outside and there's no precipitation going on. But I think that the next time it comes up, if you do a little bit of research on vertical navigation, and I'll just take a moment to tell you now how you can do that, go into the accessibility voiceover settings and then move to rotor items or to rotor, and then rotor items is the first item under rotor. And on rotor items, you get to pick and choose the components that will display when you're using the rotor.
Yep.
When you work your way through that list and you get to vertical navigation, make sure that it's checked.
Yep.
And then when you are using the weather app or any number of other apps, you can change the rotor setting over to vertical navigation. And when you do, your up and down flicks become your ability to move vertically through what is displayed instead of having to go item by item, which on the weather app is hour by hour by hour by hour.
Mm-hmm. Yep, very cool.
So give that a shot and see if that doesn't help you speed your way through what's going on. But your question also points out the dynamic nature of the weather app. When it is raining or any other type of precipitation that's going on, the app is a little dynamic in that they throw in one more row of data that is displayed with different data elements by hour. And that gives you the ability to know whether the rain is going to stay strong hour by hour, if it's going to back off, and when those slow times in the rain cycle might be.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Other questions or comments? Is there a weather app that any of you have used that we didn't go over today that you think is worth everyone else hearing about?
No, you covered them all.
Oh, I didn't cover them all. There are easily dozens of different weather apps out there, and all of the local television stations here in Chicago have their own, if you will, news apps. Like NBC Chicago has their news app, and there's a weather function on it. And you know, the local meteorologists that you listen to when you're watching the evening news will be the ones providing, or the morning news for that matter, are the ones who provide those forecasts. So those are options in addition to the ones that are dedicated to just purely weather. But those 6 are the ones that I seem to read the most about and that are given the most amount of attention. And those are the ones, and just a review of their respective accessibility. If no one else has any other questions or comments, I want to thank you all very much for joining us today for today's episode of Apple Exchange. And you can plan on joining us next month. Look out for the announcement in the monthly newsletter for the date and time and what the topic is going to be. So you can join us again. And thank you all very much for your patience, and have a great rest of the day.
Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to go through this. You clearly researched it really well, and you presented in such a fun Casey Kasem-like fashion. So appreciate it so much. Awesome.
You're quite welcome, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Great job.
Alrighty.
Have a good one. Thank you.